Well, we're back for another segment, believe it or not, with the Grassy Knoll. Beyond the Grassy Knolls, we call it these days, and we have with us Ev Halliford. You have heard him before. He's been on once. He's also been on with Gordon Comstock, and that's those are shows apparently that resonated very well with all you folks. I'm not saying this demeaningly, but you know, one of the things that we do, and that Gordon does too, is we have shows on with people who are, just like ourselves, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's something, like I said, resonates with folks because listeners want to know there's people out there just like they. And the last time Ed was on with us, we talked about his remembrances of his dad, and that got some kind of response. There's no doubt about it. A very positive one and a very emotional one. And Ed also struck a chord when he was on Gordon's show not too long ago, and he's back with us today from the great city of New York. Ev, thanks for coming back with us. And how's things going by you?
Well, it's raining right now, but other than that, it's kind of chilly and raining. I think that's typical spring weather in New York.
No one can ever feel badly for us down here in Florida, and I understand that. But what they don't understand is sometimes I get tired of squinting and sweating. And I would rain. We are in very dire straits. This usually happens every year, and this is no different. Yeah, I guess it must be a pain in the rear end. I remember how it was up in New York, but I'll be honest with you, I trade off a couple of weeks of weather for you in a heartbeat. So, at any rate, thanks for coming on. We exchanged emails, and you posited some very interesting ideas to which you're going to speak tonight. Do you want to at least give the listeners and myself some kind of thesis statement, if you would? I'm not trying to be pedantic here, but give us an outline of what you'd like to cover, perhaps in this hour. In a second, we'll see how far we go.
Well, I've often heard, these kind of biblical critics, criticize the theory of evolution, from the six-day New Earth perspective. And what I wanted to do was something completely different from what these other people had done, is actually sit down and discuss the scientific problems with the theory of evolution, and then take that and kind of do a periscope back and look where these ideas came from.
Mm-hmm.
And tying in a little bit to what I talked about before on Gordon's program and a little bit on yours about the power structure of those people at the top, in a way of self-justification for why they've risen to the top of the heap, to come up with a scientific theory to justify their blue blood attitude towards themselves and their derision and antagonism towards the unwashed masses at the bottom.
Let me ask you this also, and of course I don't know, and so I can answer this cold, and that's the best way to do it. And that is, did you find necessarily that one of the byproducts of the whole idea of evolution, as forwarded, and I guess I'm giving this away a little bit, but I think Darwin was a twit. I think Erasmus, his grandfather, probably was the guy who got things going. But that this all turns also into, as H.G. Wells would say, and admonish Francis Galton, that, forget selective breeding. We want to slay the hindmost. And that was very prevalent in United States society and probably was abrogated, or at least delayed, by World War II, and now I think is rearing its head very surreptitiously under the banner right now of bioethics. Long question, I know. What I'm asking you is depopulation part of this whole idea?
Of course it is, and this goes back to Plato's Republic when he talked about only breeding the best people, and those that were the inferiors, basically refusing to allow them to breed and ultimately killing them all. And if you go back and you read all the writings of all of these so-called Darwinists, you step back from them, and the background of all of this is their desire to kill anyone that they consider inferior, and to be removed from this kind of Christian ethic, of every individual being created in the image of God. Therefore, having value and worth, and the wholesale slaughter of all of these images of God from a Christian perspective would be a great moral atrocity. But in the theory of Darwinism, with its survival of the fittest doctrine, this is a reflection of the way nature is. In fact, they're enhancing the species by killing off the undesirables. They're participating in this process of nature of purifying the race. And, all the echoes back to Nazism and everything else, people consider Hitler to be an aberration. But, in fact, he was mainstream anthropology. His ideas were the norm being taught in universities all around the world at the time. And especially going back to the 1900s,
And, like I said, I didn't know if you would resonate with that, not because, we didn't, do a lot of brushing of notes, and I think that's good, because I can talk to you as others would, off the cuff, and find out, I don't know if you really are thinking the way I am, but what do you think about this? And, of course, you've responded. And I'll tell you something that happened today without trivializing the time we have together. And as I went back to the library for which I worked up at St. Leo's, and I talked to the librarians there, and we had this kind of discussion saying, you folks, and that most folks are good people in the sense of they would never have these thoughts. And when they hear others who espouse these, they're like, that can't be real. Not because they don't think it's there. It's because it's not within their ken to be this way. And that's meritorious. But that they have to understand that that's being kicked around in high places. And one of the things I spoke to them about, and I don't know if you've ever looked at that website, Galton.org, an exchange that's also captured in the book by Edwin Black called War Against the Weak. When Galton's like, look, if we want to kind of benefit the races, why don't we just have selective breeding, which also obviates marriage. Ward and June Cleaver are not going to get married unless they can give us good, or they're not going to link, if you will, unless they can give us, superior offspring. And H.G. Wells basically slapped Galton down and said, the heck with selective breeding. Let's kill the hindmost, as happens in, nature. And, folks don't really believe that he really meant that. He did. And he's representative of an element that was very, very prevalent at the early part of the 20th century, kind of went underground. And also Rockefeller's part of this with the Population Council and the whole idea of, mandatory sterilization of those who were seen to be inveterate criminals, blah, blah, blah. That happened in the United States. That died away. Now it's coming back again. Again, I know I've said a lot, but people have to understand, I'm only trying to frame the fact of that spirit has been with us through the 20th century, and it's coming back in spades right now. Your thoughts on that?
It goes back to the 18th century as well.
Yeah, it does.
I think about the 1700s with the beginning of the so-called Enlightenment, which, of course, we could go on for hours describing how the Enlightenment was just a rediscovery of these old pagan ideas. It's postulated by Plato and Pythagoras and all of these people from the mystery schools. But the point of it all being that the evolution itself, the theory goes back to the Hindu belief of the progression of a soul through various life forms, beginning with insects up till you finally reach that highest state where union with the so-called gods. And this is the context in which this theory was postulated. And when Darwin and Darwin's grandfather Erasmus and T.H. Huxley and all of those so-called evolutionists around him first began to postulate this theory of natural selection, they had this context in which to justify this racial supremacy doctrine. And then they postulated the theory, a theory which Darwin himself said if they couldn't find intermediary species in the fossil record, would be proven false. And, they have been searching for 160 years now for evidence of Darwin's theory of natural selection. They haven't been able to find a single intermediary species. I mean, I remember studying high school biology, and they talked about a species was the smallest unit of an organism which could reproduce with itself and no one else. And we all know you can breed a horse and a donkey and get a mule, but the mule is infertile, and this is true of all of these species, and even with genetic manipulation, what they call, GMO foods and everything else, putting pigs' genes in corn. These kinds of manipulations don't produce new species. You may alter the characteristic of a species. You may make a tomato, able to last longer in the shelf, but you're not creating a new kind of tomato. And we haven't been that successful at creating new species. And if we can't do it with all of this technology, shooting these, DNA through these guns, what they call microscopic guns, to try to force them into new DNA patterns in cells, nature itself hasn't been very successful at demonstrating this theory. And this is one of the fundamental bulwarks of the theory of evolution, that these kinds of mutations do occur. And even if you're not going to argue, for six-day creation in the story in Genesis, in order for a theory to have validity, you have to be able to, using the scientific method, demonstrate that it's reproducible.
One of the things, and I'm going to ask you if you perceive this, sometime in the late 80s and early 90s, when I speak about the character who was a friend of mine called the Renaissance Landscaper, and we had these discussions when I worked with him. He was not a Christian, but he was very, very adamant at a time in that period that evolution had lost all of its teeth and was less almost than an axiom. And we talked about this, and I said okay, and like I said, I wasn't thinking about the way things are as I do now. And so we saw that kind of fall the way of nickel candy. But it has come roaring back as far as I can perceive. I'm long removed from talking to him and being with him. But evolution has suddenly, seemingly to me, and I'm going to ask you to speak to this, gotten legs again, as if they were looking for another generation in which they could instill this for an end event, which we've talked about right now, which I believe is depopulation. So, again, I'll ask you, I'll distill it down to its smallest component. One, were you around and sentient enough to perceive that evolution kind of died in the 80s and suddenly seems to have reared its head again? Your reflections on that?
Well, I remember what prompted me to even think about doing this program was a discussion that Gordon and I had about my son. He asked me a question about my oldest boy when he was in high school biology. And, of course, he was struggling with all of these evolutionary ideas. And he came home and he set me down. And he says, Dad, they're telling me that, according to this German scientist Ernst Haeckel, that the human embryo goes through the stages of being a fish and then a reptile. And you've seen this chart, these pictures that this German scientist Haeckel painted, trying to prove just through the drawing itself that the human embryo recapitulated, all of the steps in evolution. Of course, now, that we've got microscopes and video equipment, and they've gone into the intrauterine, into the womb, they've proven that all of these drawings are ridiculous. The human embryo doesn't go through stages. At first it has gills like a fish. None of this happens. But this is still being taught in the textbooks. And, of course, he brought this to me, and he explained this to me. And when I told him, I said, look, these ideas, as they're being capitulated in the schools, are not new ideas. They're very old ideas, going back, to Plato and others. And I began to explain to him. And, of course, he went to the school and had a discussion with his teacher, and the teacher being a staunch Darwinist and an atheist, and got up in class and said that it was her duty to convince through science that God doesn't exist. She ended up failing him for the course, and I began to realize at this point that he was being indoctrinated like a whole generation in these theories, which I had long ago, discarded.
Dismissed, yeah. Let me ask you this too. What struck me was this: if you could affix to Homo sapiens the paradigm that only the strong should survive. If you can, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen necessarily in the wild, if you will, but if you can bring that over to Homo sapiens, then of course it would work that you must by necessity, as well said, slay the hindmost. Is that what we're seeing with this embracing of Darwin's theory? Once again,
we're trying to create an environment in which people will accept the mass extermination of these undesirable people, and this is the whole point behind all of it, is to create a mood and a climate so that when they begin to carry out these procedures, that there's going to be a sympathy for it among the population.
A sympathy in the meaning that
foolish people don't realize that they themselves are going to be on the target list for the extermination.
Well, two good points, and let me ask you this. You use the word sympathy, but you could also use the word support for. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that they
don't...
don't...
A lot of people actually think that this is true. Not only do they have sympathy, they support it. In fact, believe that in the myth of overpopulation.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, statistically, we have like 6.6 billion people on the planet, which seems like a lot. But if you go back and you think of a number of insects on the planet, I mean, human population is insignificant compared to the panoply of species that exist on this planet. In fact, they said that if you took all the people in the world and put them in a city, with the same density as New York City, you could fit all the people in the world in the state of Connecticut. In fact, in this country, most people live in large cities that are within 25 miles of the coastline. The vast interior of the country is empty, and this is true of most industrialized nations. The people live usually within 25 miles of a coastline, and then in the interior of the country, population density is insignificant. I mean, think about states like Iowa and Idaho and in Montana and Wyoming.
I know. I'm only laughing because there was another example of this that was forwarded by, I think, the individual who runs the website I've talked about, Stanford.something or other. I don't know if you've ever come across that, and it escapes you right now. But his point was you could also put them in the province of Alberta, and they all can probably have like 2 square miles for everybody, and it would all be okay. And then you get the naysayers who are like, well, it's not arable land, and who wants to live there? And all this reflects also, and I'm going to ask you your thoughts on this, and that is to finally reach depopulation, which is what we're talking about with Darwinism and catastrophism, and that is you have to have problems that are insoluble. You have to now finally reach a point where there is no way to help ourselves out. We're screwed. The only answer is depopulation. What are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing that that's the way things are configuring themselves as far as...
Well, they're doing things like, buying oil refineries and closing them down to create shortages in heating oil and petroleum and gasoline. They're limiting the food supply by stopping production so that the wheat prices and corn prices, they're taking most of, I should say a huge portion of the corn crop, and they're turning it into alcohol for no apparent reason, just because they have a requirement now of mixing it in with the gasoline.
Well, all
of these things are designed to create, scarcity when scarcity doesn't exist. There's so much productive land in the world. That if it were all put to growing food, this country used to be able to feed most of the planet with its wheat production and corn production.
Yeah, but they're selling the fact that there's not enough. And one of the things I think about, and I'm not pulling a rank on here because I'm older than dust, but when I went across country on my college graduation gift to myself, in 1975, we had just gotten past, like, the oil crisis, if you remember. Oh, that was another one. And I was pumping ethanol all through the Midwest. This was not a big deal. And all of a sudden now, it's like, ethanol? Corn? Oh, there's not enough. You know what I mean? I look back at those times, and I look now, and we've not even touched upon, really, the use of ethanol, and I'm like, how did all of a sudden this become a big no, we can't? And that's what I see all through this, is that, what about this? No, we can't. What about no, we can't? It's no, 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 no. Again, that's my view from over 3-4 decades. Are you perceiving also that we have to get ourselves into a situation where there is no way out except depop? What about that?
Well, that's exactly the conditions they're creating in order to force us into making these hard choices as they see them. But of course, it's a choice that is planned from the beginning, and have the scarcity so that the people will be forced to make these choices. And then, of course, they're putting all kinds of chemicals in the food to sterilize people, to lower sperm counts, and do everything in order to naturally reduce the amount of people by simply reducing the number of offspring that people have. And, that's the agenda. Now, if you look at the science there, teaching in order to justify the agenda, then you realize that they need a theory which says this is the way that nature works. Now, ignoring the fact that there's... the model, especially in the insect kingdom, is not one of predator-prey, but of cooperation.
Okay.
That if you look in most of the so-called higher, primates, it's cooperation. It's not competition. We think that this paradigm of competition between species is normative, and it's not normative because, given an abundance, a lot of these so-called theories of natural selection collapse.
If I would have asked you if cooperation among a species was relative to their mortality or fatality rate. I mean, I know that sounds crazy. I mean, it's one death per unit. I understand that. But when you look at the more fragile species, would they be more cooperative to enhance their chances of survival as opposed to more developed when you get into, mammals, etc.? But are you saying that regardless whether it's a mammal or whether it's an insect, that cooperation is more the case than a survival of the fittest type of struggle? Is that right?
Yeah, well, what made the species survive was the ability of its members to cooperate with each other. By cooperating with each other, that ensures the survival of the whole group. I mean, this is the one thing, the one chink in the armor of this so-called theory of evolution is that Darwin himself had to recognize that it didn't matter whether individual animal within a species survived. It was that whole group that survived, which determined the passing on of those characteristics under their offspring. That whether or not one individual lives or dies doesn't matter under his theory. It's whether or not the group survives. And this is the problem. Those at the top, they're very selfish, and they ultimately believe that what's important is their own survival, their own preeminence. And yes, they have long-term plans, for their own group, their own so-called blue blood elite group. But overall, they're less cooperative. I mean, it's hard for us to imagine. We look at this vast, leadership. We see all the protocols that they put in place in order to control us, and we think that that, they're pretty cooperative, but, they're like a mafia gang, fighting and vying for power all the time, extremely competitive. There's a pecking order among them, and they're always trying to move up and down that pecking order. And they've taken that morality, which is their own psychopathic morality, and then they've tried to enhance that into a broad paradigm of science, and to use that as a scientific theory to justify their own behavior, their own bloodlust, so to speak. And so there's no physical evidence for that. There's no intermediary species. The fossil record is inconclusive to the theory. They can't show how gene mutations produce the divergences which would require the creation of new species. They can't show how a single-celled animal can become a multicellular animal. They can't demonstrate any of this, and behind the back of it is this whole I don't know exactly how to put it, but this whole tapestry demonstrating that there's an intelligent design behind everything, that there's engineering involved in all of this, that the eye works in a certain way based upon physical principles that couldn't have arisen through random chance, that like the flagellum of a paramecium or a bacteria operates like a rotary motor, with each part having to have been perfectly designed in order to function, with synchronicity. And how did all of those things develop randomly? And they can't explain any of these things, and it's all in the scientific literature about these central problems in evolution, and they discuss these among themselves at all these seminars that they go to. But when it comes to defending these theories to those outside the scientific community, then suddenly there's a wall of silence. Oh, there are no problems. The fossil record clearly demonstrates what we believe. It is possible for wings and eyes and feathers and all of these things to develop, randomly through genetic mutation, even though we've never seen this in nature. Most genetic mutations are detrimental to a species. They're detrimental to an individual. Yet how did all of these accumulate through random chance, and suddenly now you have new species with perfectly working, engineering designed wings and eyes and ears and sensory apparatus and all of these things allegedly through random chance.
So
it'd be as preposterous as walking in and seeing, a used car lot with a whole series of different kinds of vehicles, from Volkswagen Beetles to Mercedes-Benz to minivans to trucks, and then postulating a theory. See that small one there? These must have developed and reproduced from the little one.
Into Cadillacs.
Yes.
Well, I tell you what, I've been looking at my Nissan Sentra for 99, and that sucker isn't growing into anything new. No, I'm being...
Even if you accept Descartes' belief that living beings are just machines, which... There's no real evidence for this theory, but even if you accept his strict materialism, there's such a diversity of design in all of these machines, yet a uniformity of purpose throughout all of these species. We think of whales and fish. Their fins resemble each other, yet they're completely different species, and one with gills and one with lungs.
Mm-hmm.
How did that develop? How did a whale and how did a porpoise and a dolphin end up with fins that resemble the fins of a fish? Yet if you look at this as that there's a common designer behind all of these, I mean, you go and you look at an architect, like Frank Lloyd Wright, and there's a commonality to all of his houses and all of the buildings he designed that were part of his creative vision of how he saw, structures. Yet people look at the panoply of all of the designs in nature and say, well, there is no pattern. There is no intelligent mind behind any of this. It all developed randomly. And to me, this is one of the central philosophical problems with this whole Darwinistic theory, is you're forced to ignore the evidence of your own eyes and your own senses. You're forced to ignore these patterns, which clearly show. As I think it's Psalm 103 says, the heavens declare the handiwork of God.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, if you're amoral and psychopathic and you wish to murder everyone around you, and you don't want to adhere to the value of any human life, to believe that there's a hand behind the world that you have to answer to at some point, that's entirely inconvenient for you.
We're on the bottom of the hour, and we're talking with Ev Halliford, and you folks have heard him here sometime before. He's also been in an interview with Gordon Comstock, and those files are still available on Gordon's website. Ev, I don't know if this pertains to what we're talking about. I've not got a chance to read it. You did come out with a novel, let's just talk about it. I mean, I don't know, you were on the precipice of having a publisher. I don't know where that's going, and I hope I'm not talking out of class, but can you speak to that, and whether or not that has any bearing necessarily on what we're talking about? Can you and would you talk to that?
Well, I've got right now I'm in the process of struggling with the book contract, so apparently, if I can get the contract signed and everything done, the book's going to be published maybe in October. This has been a 15-year dream of mine. I didn't think it was ever going to happen, because after being turned down by every major publishing house under the sun for years of attempting to get it published, finally this small publishing house has agreed to do it. And it does relate to this theory that I had about the nature of perception, which is part of this second thing I wanted to talk about evolution, is that evolution, it presupposes that this material world that we live in is actually real. And, that objects that we see and that the world that we perceive, that there isn't something beneath all of this. It's what this physicist David Bohm called, I don't know if you know about David Bohm. He believed that there was an explicate order, which is the world that we see with our eyes and with our senses, the world we can measure. But there was an implicate order that we can't necessarily see with our eyes or measure with our instruments. And that implicate order was more holistic than, less particular than the world which we could see. And he argued that part of our problem is that we created lenses, telescope lenses, eyeglass lenses, and lenses tend to focus your attention to a small area. And when we look at a small area, by virtue that we're looking at that small area, we fail to see the panorama, the whole huge picture of things. And this was the theme of the book that I wrote, about a human life and how in each individual human life we can see, by looking into the heart, the experiences, the struggles that we have in that individual life. It gives us a picture of all of the struggles that all of us have. And by looking through the eyes of that character, that person, that we begin to see through the eyes of other people, that the panoply, the tapestry, which we're all like threads woven through it, and to me this was one of the themes about I wanted to cover. And this is not Darwinistic, because in Darwinism, the vast majority of individuals die and death reigns. But in this tapestry, there's no one lost. No one is lost. No life is insignificant. No life is not worthy of praise and of honor.
But are you saying that we go through life basically with tunnel vision, and we don't understand the whole breadth of creation? I mean,
we also don't understand that our place, the synchronicity, the serendipity of our lives, about how we encounter each other. I mean, all of us have these odd synchronicities in our lives where, we meet people that somehow knew other people in our lives, and we have conversations with them, and then we suddenly realize that we had a connection to them even long before we met them.
Mm-hmm.
I've had this happen so many times in my life, and it's every time it happens, it reminds me of the 6 degrees of separation that they talk about, how each one of us is somehow connected to every other person in the universe. And Bohm talks about this holographic idea of the universe, that the universe is in fact a hologram. And a hologram is created by interference patterns of 2 laser lights. And, they interfere, they create ripples on a piece of film. And in a hologram, or in a holographic film, the entire 3-dimensional object is stored, and you can cut it into smaller pieces, and each smaller piece gives you a smaller miniature of the larger picture. And he says this is the structure of the universe. This is how everything is interconnected and related to everything. And this is a sense which is the opposite of evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Evolution says that, it's survival of the fittest, and most of us are refuse, and the inferior, are destroyed by nature. And they don't produce offspring, and they don't have any value, and they can be slaughtered and murdered. Whereas if we live in an implicate universe, as Bohm and this neurologist Carl Pribram says, where everything is interconnected, where the universe is a fluctuating energy field, and we're part of that field. We're interacting with that field in our whole human life, and our consciousness is merely using these bodies of ours as a means in which to communicate and experience this 3-dimensional reality we call the world, this kind of matrix that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
Then death itself is merely a part of that tapestry. We're experiencing this as a part of the tapestry. It's not permanent. It's not real in the sense. It's part of this illusion that we experience. It's part of this, and Christianity in its nature says that, through the, this resurrection of Christ, that he demonstrated that what we experience with our senses, being trapped in a sense within them, it isn't real. That ultimately, once our consciousness is freed from the body, we may not be able to communicate or interact with this 3-dimensional physical world anymore, but the consciousness somehow survives the death of the body. And this is not what Darwinism, with its strict materialism, teaches us. That most of us are unconscious, and most of us are unintelligent, and most of us are deserving of death.
Well, let me ask you this. When you say the consciousness exists, isn't that another way of saying, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, and you'll tell me if that's not what you're thinking about, but, I mean, to me, when you said that, it necessarily means that consciousness or the soul never gets destroyed. God does not destroy the soul. No soul is ever destroyed. It goes on in an afterlife wherever it might go. But the physical husk, may be just that, and it's shirked off, as Shakespeare would say, the mortal coil. But am I right in saying that when you talk about consciousness, to me what I'm hearing from you is the idea that the soul goes on? Never, ever is anything destroyed regarding that. And I think that's scriptural. Am I right or wrong in getting that from you?
Yeah, that's what I'm arguing. I'm arguing that whatever we experience in this life through these bodies, and all these bodies that I see, all these bodies ultimately are constructions out of this fabric of space and time, so that we can move and have our being in them. In a way, we incarnate, not in the same way as the Creator, according to the Christian, incarnated and became Christ, but we incarnate. We enter into this physical world. We build from the world bodies for ourselves out of the material. I mean, literally, this is what happens. Anyway, we start with a single cell, and then we multiply to more cells and more cells. Then we take in food, and then we break down that food, and then from that food we build more cells and more cells. So there are billions of cells in a human body. And then those cells begin to die and go into dysfunction, disharmony, and eventually the body ceases to function. This is the biological process. Plants do it. They start with a single cell in a seed, and they multiply, and then they become a plant, and they draw nourishment and nutrients and elements from the soil, and then they build all of that structure we see from those elements. This is the creative process of all of life. And if you go back and you look at a plant cell or an animal cell, they have the same structure, the same DNA, the same programming, the same methodology by which they reproduce themselves. And we have yet to find a plausible scientific explanation for how this could have developed spontaneously.
Eb, I'm going to ask you something, and we're not going to cover all the ground. We wondered, as I often do with guests, I mean, do you think we're going to cover this in an hour? And I'm going to tell you this, and I'm not greasing you. There are some shows where you talk to folks, and the minutes just go by like hours, and it's like, we're never going to get through this. And now I'm looking at us, and we're going to be on like 3/4 of an hour, and I don't even know if you got into the good stuff yet, so I'm just going to alert listeners and yourself that we might have to pick this up at another time as well. Having said that, and being very sincere about that, I'm going to ask you something, because, I mean, I'm just going to do it, and I think you'll understand why. And I don't know what this says, whether it's hereditary, I don't know. But Ev, there's a song by Bonnie Raitt in which she says, life gets awful precious when there's less of it to waste. And, I'm like 57, it's not a big deal. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this, I'm going to ask you your take on what this is about. And it may be a little too melancholy and a little bit too syrupy. But, I have just become more aware of all life forms. To the point where, like, when a spider comes into the house, I'm like, dude, I'm not going to kill you. Will you please leave? And I'm not getting, like, Hindu or anything like that. My point is that, do you believe in Homo sapiens? If you're anywhere, I mean, whether you're Christian or not, that there comes an awareness of the cycles of life where, because you become much more respective of all life forms. I mean, not that they're elevated to the point of a human being. All right, and I'm hoping I'm not getting too crazy with you, but I'm just looking at things and saying, I mean, I'm more aware of like hawks and doves and all this other stuff that's going on, and I just want to I want to let everybody do what they're going to do. I don't want to be the person who interrupts anything. I know this sounds kind of crazy, and it's probably not really a great Western idea, but does that? I mean, do you understand where I'm coming from? I mean, I now just don't want to. I don't know. End anything, which, however small or nasty it is, I just want life to go on. I mean, does that make any sense to you? And I'm sorry if I've thrown you a curveball, but I have to ask you. Go ahead, bro. Nail me.
Each of us in our gut knows that there's something seriously amiss in the universe. We get this sense, even those that people that you think are completely asleep, have in their gut this feeling that death isn't a natural thing. That there's something really crazy about taking a human body and burying it in a casket in the ground,
Yeah.
That there's something inherently amiss about what's going on in the world. That why do cells die? Why do life forms die? Why do lions kill zebras? Why is, St. Paul, in his Epistle to the Romans, said that the whole universe was in the pangs of childbirth, waiting this period of being tied to corruption to be over with. And, and Isaiah said something about the lion laying down with the lamb, the little boy leading them, and no longer would there be death in the world. And we all sense...
Yes.
I shouldn't say we all, because I think the psychopaths that were running the world are death worshippers. They relish in death and destruction. But the normal people, and I use that term very loosely, that we meet, the decent people, who would find it hard to imagine a serial killer or anything like these things, they have a sense in which that they understand that life is precious, it should be preserved, that animals are precious, that they, as much as possible, they should be preserved. And this is an impulse that I think comes from that whole creative center of ourselves, that we, being creative beings, and I think that that creativity has to be beaten out of us. I remember, this whole Protestant ethic where I was growing up, where my mother and father were basically trying to beat the creative impulse out of me. They were telling me, you're daydreaming, which I did a lot as a child. I would sit around and daydream, and I would think of stories and fantasize about, things. And my mother would come and say, "What are you doing?" And I'd say, "I'm daydreaming." She says, "Boy, there's something wrong with you. There's something wrong with you. You should be working." That same Paul, taken out of context statement. He who doesn't work shall not eat. This work ethic, that Protestant work ethic that I was raised with, that children by nature, before it's beaten out of them, are creative beings, filled with imagination and a lust for life. And we have to be put in the government schools, sent through the government mind control program in order to beat that out of us, so that we're like automatons asleep, little robots like out of Fritz Lang's Metropolis,
Yeah.
walking in goose step with each other.
Well, on one hand, I have to say, I know when a development is made, and we've seen this all through our lifetime. And, of course, I saw this very much in Jersey. And then when I moved to Florida, unfortunately, it happened here, too. And there's a displacement of the wildlife and such. And I'm not okay with that. And yet, it's kind of, I'm conflicted because it's like, well, all right, what do we do? And I also have a great suspicion about radical environmentalists. But the point is that I guess maybe as I get older, and I'm going to really get weird here, and say for one of the last times I ever listened to Alex Jones, I don't know what got into him, and he talked about reverence for life of anything, to the point where you didn't even want to stomp out a spider, and yet that stayed with me, and as much as I don't want anything to do with him, when he, in that one moment when he just spoke like that, I've always held on to it. And now I understand it. Like I said, I don't know if it's a product of advanced age when I know that, my days are numbered. Of course, they've always been. But that I just don't want to interrupt anything. And I'm not trying to get like Hindu or, Far Eastern about anything. But I don't know. I mean, there's a preciousness of life. And in a way, that the whole cycle will continue, and it has its casualties, including us. And, I might be going far afield with here, but I kind of don't think so, and I think you'll understand that. And that is now, at this late stage, and I think we're on the precipice of something very catastrophic, instead of snuffing the spider with Raid, I'm like trying to get it in a napkin and bring it outside. And that's me, man. I understand that. But I don't know. I mean, can you explain that to me? I mean, should you be able to? I mean, is this something that you've hit upon? And like I said, good old Viz, can get crazy on you in any second. But would you address that at all? I mean, I think you have been. But am I getting soft in a melon, or am I?
Well, I told you the story about my father. You remember?
Yes. Oh boy,
Big,
yes.
Tough guy from Texas. The only time I saw him cry, except after my mother's death, was when he killed the dog, and he went into the room and cried. And my mother wouldn't let me go inside because he says, "Please don't go in there. You're crying because he killed the dog." That even he, in his gut, had this sense of the sacredness of life. And all decent people, I think, have that sense.
But
that's. I don't don't want to kill anything. I don't want to be responsible. I've been a vegan for 10 years now. I mean, there's no, people laugh at me sometimes and say, how could you not eat meat? But I said, at least I know some animal isn't dying, so in order to give me life. I mean, it was the hardest thing. I mean, I was a big meat eater, and I loved my steak, and I loved my, barbecue and Texas barbecue and everything else I grew up with, and it was hard to give up all of that. But I think in these last catastrophic days that we're living in, right on the precipice of something dark, of entering a whole new dark ages in a way, in which those feudal forces that that had allowed us out of our cages for a while want to put us back in the cages. I think that those of us that still have the light and still have the desire to cherish life and to turn away from death, that we should be celebrating life.
We're not going to get into a lot of the other stuff which you laid out. And I'm going to ask you at this point, with a gun to your head and your back against the wall, would you come back on also to talk about the things that we've not spoken about and can't get into at this late hour, which is, the doctrine also of, what would you call it,
Uniformitarian.
Yeah, that's too long a word for me, bro.
Look, I can say one quick sentence to give people a kind of foretaste of what is going to come.
Okay.
There are two theories of history. One is catastrophism, the belief that we're going through a series of catastrophes, that we have the great flood, the deluge, and then life starts over again on the planet. And in catastrophism, you can have an advanced civilization, and that civilization be destroyed by catastrophe, much like these theories about the dinosaurs being destroyed. And then civilization starts over again. And that was the prevalent theory before this man named Charles Lyell postulated this theory of uniformitarianism, he called it, that history was not, in fact, a series of catastrophes, but was a uniform progression going all the way back into time. And, of course, there's no way for us to know. It's one of the central problems of philosophy, what they call inductive reasoning, a belief that the past and the present and the future are all the same. We can't prove this, no more than you can prove that the velocity of light, which we now measure at 186,000 miles per second, has always been 186,000 miles per second. All we can say with any degree of certainty is that the universe and the laws in the universe have been constant only for as long as we've been able to perceive them. We can't say anything about the ancient past or the future. We don't know that when we get up in the morning that the Earth is going to rotate at the same speed. We don't know any of this with certainty. And this was one of the central problems of philosophy, what they call inductive reasoning. Taking an event from the past or an experience from the past and then, projecting into the future and saying we could make predictions from that. We can't, no one knows the future, so to speak, and I think we even know less about the past. How many times have you had an experience in your life of a series of events and you thought you understood what was happening, but now that you've had sufficient distance and more information, you've come to realize that your conclusions about those past events were completely mistaken? And this is the problem. This is the problem with the whole scientific theory. It's based upon our experience now. And we take our experience now and we either project it into the past or we project it into the future and we try to make predictions from it.
All right. Now, let me ask you this, because, and again, I don't mean to pin you down or anything, but we go back and forth with this thing about global warming, and I'm not saying that it's not happening. The question whether it is induced or exacerbated by, man's presence on this planet, or whether it's, it's the cycle this time around. Myopic vision can, as you would say, I guess, abet, I would say, nefarious or knee-jerk reactions to what's going on instead of standing back and saying, look, let's look at the whole scope of things and whether this has come around again. Would I be right? I mean, this is what I think you're saying, and that is, let's stand back and take a look at the whole spectrum across so many, as much data as we have. And right now, I think, global warming, though I don't doubt it's happening, is this natural, or is this something we've,
It's funny. The same scientists that were predicting global warming are predicting it now. 30 years ago, were predicting global cooling. So they've changed their opinions, their minds. But ultimately, if you stand back again, behind all of this is this whole idea we talked about earlier of scarcity, that resources are running out. Man is putting such a strain on the planet that we have to reduce population. It's the same agenda behind all of it.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Fact, carbon dioxide, which is the life gas, the gas which gives plants their life, which plants produce the oxygen, that whole cycle, that symbiosis between us and the plant kingdom, is driven primarily by carbon dioxide. So if ultimately you work to cut down carbon dioxide emissions, you're going to reduce the fruitfulness of plants. You're going to kill the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's absurd. I mean, it's just completely absurd because we don't know what the optimum level of carbon dioxide is. All of this is based upon, theories about, the relationship between, carbon dioxide and temperature, which have not been conclusively proven. And it's based upon, this framework, as I said, of eugenics, which stands back behind all of it.
Well, let me ask you this. I mean, I've asked other guests this. You not necessarily have to field this question because you didn't know this was going to be asked, and you don't have to have an opinion on it cold. But I tell you what, I stopped the show for a while. I came back because I think 2008 is a very critical year. That's my take, not yours. But let me ask you this. From a Christian perspective, from just an observation perspective, one or both together, what is your take about what we might be on? And I know this is a leading question. What we might be on the precipice of? Are we looking at something, shall I say, revelatory, as in Revelations?
Well, I think that there are people that want to bring about this. They want to make the book of Revelation happen in this time. It wouldn't be the first time that this has happened. I mean, there was a theory in a group of people called Montanists in the 200s that believed that Christ was coming back and set out to create a whole series of events. They provoked the Roman Empire into a mass persecution of Christians in order to justify, that Christ was coming back to force his hand.
Mm-hmm.
In the year 1000, at the end of the so-called first millennium, there was a whole group of people that were looking to the heavens and for signs and wonders that Christ was coming back. In the year 2000, the same thing. All of these people talking about the Mayan calendar and, December 21st, 2012. We may, in fact, be at the end of things, but human experience has shown me that in every successive generation, there are people that want to somehow make this happen. They're anxious for it to happen. And in a kind of sick and perverse way, there are Christians who want to see Armageddon, who want to see mass murder and destruction in order to bring about, the second coming of Christ. And I don't want to see this happen because in the end, it may all be, wish fulfillment. May be, a desire of certain people to produce these effects, thinking Christ will come back, and they'll be so sorely disappointed as those in 1000 were, as the Montanists were, and all of these people that tried to, force, God's time clock, so to speak.
But do you believe he's going to come back again?
Yes, I do.
And there has
this time now. I mean, we may live to see it. I'm certainly preparing myself for that.
Okay. All right. we've been talking with Ev Halliford, and Ev, if we've not done justice to all that you laid out, I'm going to ask you, and of course if I do this on air, you have to say yes, because what else you can say? But can we do kind of like a part two to this?
Yeah, anytime you want. I'll be glad to sit down and to have a chat with you about it. We can get into theories of perception and what the nature is of the scientific paradigm, all those other things that we weren't able to talk about tonight.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, when I looked at what you had to lay out, for however long I've done this and however I am, proficient or not about it, when you look at what people lay out as far as what they want to talk to, you can see that there are some topics that are like gigantic. It's like, well, I don't know if we're going to be able to cover this in an hour. If you could do that, if you were constrained to that, obviously, with the format of this show and the time frame, it is about as free flow as you can get. So we have that opportunity to be able to do that, and that's why I said to you, before we came on, it's like, look, if you don't squeeze all the good stuff into an hour, we can't get that done. And again, like I said, I cannot be presumptive or generous with somebody else's time, because the good thing about talking to someone like yourself is that, like, you're a real person with a family and children and constraints, and that's something that listeners, of course, are all part of, and they can resonate with. So they're okay, with giving the guest the slack. Is that like, well, if that were I, I'd be in the same situation. So if you don't mind, go ahead, bro.
So I was going to say one final sentence is we should all desire to be self-educated. Don't accept what people tell you. Question everything. Question everything. That's what I try to tell my children in school. Don't accept everything the teachers are saying. Have the openness and the capacity to question what you're being told. Think about it. Reflect upon it. And that's my point of advice for everyone.
You know what? You're absolutely right. And sadly, just the opposite is true. The craft, if you would, which should be, I guess, innate to all of us, is not, and that is critical analysis. You don't have to be flying in the face of authority. You don't have to be a rebel right from the outset. There's nothing wrong in saying why, how come, and let's talk about this. However, I think that skill, the critical analytical skills, have been lost, and I would say deliberately so. How do you feel about that?
Oh, they don't want critical thinkers in the new feudal world in which we're living in. They want dumbed-down slaves that basically will do what they're told. And unfortunately, I think that I'm not going to survive if we go into this neo-feudalism. I don't have the self-discipline to become a willing and slave.
So you don't want to get behind the plow, huh? Okay. But I mean, yeah, and I mean, I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm pretty sure you are. But I mean, that book, which was made into a movie, which I thought they did well, Harrison Bergeron.
Yeah.
Please, children, don't be extraordinary. We don't want extraordinary individuals. We want, trainees to work at China Mart for the rest of their lives.
Be satisfied with working at China Mart.
Yes.
That's my biggest complaint is that I have one of these kind of jobs which is dull, mundane, and routine, like most of us have, because under feudal plantation, dull routine is the norm. So it's kind of, and the last thing you want to do is stick your head up. It's like that old Japanese proverb, the higher nail is the first to get the hammer.
Well, that's great. Look, it is a late Friday night, and here I am in the Belleville, Florida, and we're talking to Ev Halliford in my long-lost, wishful neighborhood of the greater New York City area, which I don't know if you can understand this, but I'll end on this, without people thinking I'm cracking up. Do you remember Citizen Kane?
Yeah, I remember the movie.
Do you remember that he always thought back to the sleigh and Rosebud?
Yeah, that was taken away from him as a child.
Yeah. But can you appreciate, and you don't have to, but for the sake of the show, you should say yes, that, I'm down here, and my thoughts, oftentimes when I can't sleep, go up to snapshots of my childhood up in that area. And, can you understand that? Sometimes you have to go backwards, you know what I mean? And that's what I find myself doing, I think more so now than ever before. And I think that's what I was talking to you about, that, it doesn't have to be monumental moments. I guess Thornton Wilder also touched upon this in our town. And that's like, just take me back to, just a regular day. Just to take a look at the way things were.
I miss those days when I was a child.
There you go. Just for a comfort zone, you know what I mean?
I missed them. I missed nickel candy bars and walking down to the 5 and Dime.
Yep.
A cool glass of iced tea on a hot summer day.
Yep.
I miss all of these things. A friend of mine kept telling me, "Are you happier now that you are more awake and you realize how the world really works?" And I said, "Yes and no. It's a kind of bittersweet happiness in a way." Yes, I'm happy. I'm not going down the chute to the slaughterhouse unknowingly. You understand?
I'm sorry for coughing, but you just cracked me up. So yeah, that there's a certain amount of sadness realizing that I've lost that that naivety, that idealism that I had when I was a young child. Yep. Yeah. All right. So I guess I'm going to take that as an affirmation of the way I feel down here. But that's how I fill my night sometimes, just to put myself to sleep. And I don't think that's so bad. I just think that, I was also alive and around for that particular time, which probably I didn't realize as being special in, because most human beings, obviously, in the time they're at, and even as we speak now, don't realize that there's a speciality to the time that you're, there. There's something good about everything. But looking back, obviously, to those days of nickel candy, and knee-highs, and, all the teeth-rotting stuff we ate, for 2 cents was like the best thing in the entire world.
I remember Coca-Cola's for a quarter. Can you imagine?
Yes. Oh, and the penny candy with the seriously sweet banana things. All right.
I know it's, but that world seems to have been washed away now with AIDS and robberies and police beatings and
I know. If you could walk into, we call them candy stores. You're still hip with that, right? Even though I'm a little heady in the game. You remember candy stores? They call them, whatever, now the stationary stores anyway. You can go in there with 50 cents and come out with, the highest caloric food ever in the entire world. And it was the greatest thing. It was like, wow.
Cotton candy, that pure sugar.
It's like, this is, so great. And, of course, I have to admit, too, come summertime, come baseball time, and, of course, that meant school vacation and all that other stuff. The menu that we afforded ourselves was absolutely, heinous to our bodies, but somehow they forgave us.
I know, and my kids hate me for it now, because I'm going, no candy.
No, I know. If my mother gave me $1, God knows, I could have packed about 20,000 calories into whatever I could get.
No candy, Daddy, I want candy, no candy. It's funny, but it's funny but true.
But Ev, I think also because we packed all that stuff into our bodies, but we played I think I'm a direct product of playing stickball, street ball, Little League, everything, because I couldn't sit down. So I just played, and I got the contract for whatever it meant. But my point is that fueled me into being just, the athlete I could be. And if I didn't have all that junk, I probably, would have been a mass murderer.
Well, I played Little League ball, too, so I mean, this is one of the things that kids did.
Okay, look, let's pick up with part 2, and yeah, there are serious things to talk about, and that is necessary, front and center. But on this late Friday night, I appreciate you coming on, and if you don't mind,
I said had resonated with people because, you know, we have to understand that they're jamming this science down our throats, and it is a means to get us to basically give in so that they can kill us all.
Let's call it what it is, and I mean that is, you know, something that all people will be, you know, putting their hands to their open mouth and going, "Oh no, that can't be." But it is definitely the situation. Now we've made light and we've gotten a little humorous toward the end, and that's okay. But we can't lose sight of the fact, honestly, that there are nefarious forces at hand, and people have to decide how they're going to come down, whether you're Christian or not. They're going to choices to be made, and it's a serious situation. Still, you have to live your life, and you have to extract from it, you know, whatever beauty you can. To me, it's getting easier and easier, and that's why I said back to you, you know, when I look at life forms, all of them, it's like, you know, can't we all get along? I was not that way when I was 20 or 30 or 40. Something definitely has happened, and that's probably because, you know, the life cycle has knocked on my head saying, you know, you never know when you're going to be called, and that's okay.
I'd rather go out cooperating and fighting. You know, they talk about, I'm going to go down fighting. I think more I would rather go down cooperating now in this stage in my life than go down fighting.
And you know what?
I'm talking about cooperating with each other, not cooperating with our enemies. But
you know, Ev, you know, here's the other thing I do battle with, you know, excuse the pun, with, you know, I don't know, Christians or those who call them such, and that is, you know, I'm looking in the days of grace since Christ has come and died and been resurrected, and it's like, you got to put the sword down. I mean, that's hard for me to do because I'm just by nature nasty and, you know, pugnacious, but that's not the way of Christ, and that's what we're facing now, and the way is not to battle, but, you know, obviously to put on the full armor of Christ and turn people, if we could, to a saving knowledge.
I think we're called to open people's eyes.
Yes.
As tough as it seems to be, shake them, rouse them from a sleep. And, you know, people sometimes get angry when you shake them and rouse them from their sleep, so you have to be expecting that.
And yeah, and I would say that is going to be the case from this point on, but, you know, for what better purpose would you want to do that and take the heat?
Yeah, but I imagine myself that there's a fire in the house, and the person is a sound sleeper, and you're shaking and saying, "Get out of the house, it's on fire." So they may be angry with you, but once they're awake and realize the danger that they're facing, they'll be grateful that you've woken them up, so... This is how I comfort myself through all the shouting and the torment that they're giving me while I'm trying to wake them up.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent example. But that also, I think, interjects into the schema is that they must understand that the house is definitely on fire. I think that'll become more apparent as time goes on. If it isn't, there's not much you can do. I think we've been told that that might also be the case. But for those who can smell the smoke and see the fire, I think, you know, that there'll be a dispensation for them. And also, shall I say, an added incentive to understand that the time is short. I know that's kind of vague, but I think we're upon that. I think 2008 and 2009 are going to be very pivotal.
I agree with you. I think that we're right at the cusp.
Yeah.
The movers and shakers want to make their move now, so that's why, you know, I'm so happy that the book of mine is going to be published. But I told Victoria, my wife, I said, you know, it would be my luck the way things have been going. The book's going to come out in October, and we're in martial law.
That's it. Sorry.
It's coming out.
And what is the title of that again?
Visionary.
All right. And
all about seeing.
Okay. It's a novel. It's supposedly fiction. But can I assume, I mean, you sent it to me. I have not yet read it. I mean, can we assume that it's futuristic and not necessarily so fictional? Would that be right?
Yeah, it's basically it was a fictional retelling of our experiences coming from Texas to New York. So it's a kind of personal travelogue of what happened to us. Of course, fictionalized in the human imagination, and those universal themes of small town life coming back to the city and what happens to you when you don't know anything about the way a big city works and how you're basically eaten alive. You're the weak prey in a predator society. So, and I spun a tale, a kind of parable about what happens and how, in the end, we're given a choice: do you succumb to the dark side or do you fight it? A little bit of conspiracy tossed in, and a lot of self-reflection for those first few years we were in New York, and that's my kind of parable. And I hope it resonates with people. I mean, certainly this publisher, it resonated with him, so I hope hopefully it will resonate with more people. I have no great ambitions of becoming a world famous writer, but I would like some other people to share my experience.
Well, the more accurate and true your description, probably the less you're going to be a mass consumption writer, because truth somehow gets lost when you get involved with the money. And as we've always said in the show, money changes everything. But still, in all, that doesn't mean that the craft that you've taken and the work that you've done doesn't have value. And we'll be looking forward to that. And of course, probably we'll talk before that does hit, whatever it does hit. And hopefully it'll hit before Christmas, because that's always a good time for that to happen with your publisher. But Ed Halliford, thanks for being with us. And if we can do a part 2 in the near future, would that be okay with you?
That's perfect. Just, you name the day, and I'll be glad to sit down and talk about the other stuff.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, it's good to talk to you again. I'm glad you were with Gordon. And, people email me to this day that, you've resonated with them, and that's a pretty good sign. And I think we've had, pretty good people that listen to the show. And
well, that's what Gordon told me, that the last program I did with him, that people sent him very positive emails about it.
And
I try to be real. I try to be open about and honest with people, and I hope that comes through. I mean, I'm not trying to put on the airs of pretense about being the smartest or the most articulate. Too many polished people out there that can talk a good stick, but
right. But you don't. The thing is, you don't have to give them. You don't have to be a goody two shoes and give them good news. What they're asking for, and this is where I'm going for, to, and that's what I'm saying, and that is they want reality. If you're real, that's what they want, because that's all of us what we want. And the listeners, do that all the time. And out of those listeners, some of them, like yourself, have come to the fore and said, okay, look, let me add this to the pot, and people are receptive. They don't necessarily need good news. They don't necessarily need bad news. They just want the way it is. And if that is hard for them to take, then go somewhere else. And that's my words, not yours. But that's what you've done, and that seems to be the way people react to it. And if they think they respond, and if they agree or not, the thinking and the responding is really what we want.
It's better if they don't agree.
Well, yeah.
Because that gets them to think about it.
Yeah, that's it. Honestly, that's true. And lately with the way things have been going, that's the discussion that's been. It's like, why can't we just talk about this? Why do we have to censor? But that's okay. Anyway, be that as it may, your return is very welcome, and your appearance on Gordon Comstock's show was well received. And when you came on with us that first time, for obvious reasons, with your recollections of your dad, there was a lot of guys that got down, and weepy about it, and only because it's real, and that's good, and we're going to continue to do that. We're not Oprah, we're guys, we cry, it's okay. All right. Hey, listen, what?
My wife laughs about it sometimes because she tells me, you're just as romantic as I am. You try to hide the fact. You have the same impulses that I do, because I kind of tease a little bit about romantic comedy movies. And she's right. I think in many ways, they're far more romantic than women, far less practical about relationships. So, another topic for another night. But
well, I'll tell you what, I'll stay convicted of that. It's true. Hey, Ev, listen, thanks for being with us, and we'll work something out on the sidelines for part 2. We can get back into the nitty-gritty. But thanks for coming on. Sorry we couldn't do it last week, but, we did it now. And with all that's taken place, it's always appropriate and never too late. So thanks for being with us, and we'll talk soon, okay?
Okay.
Take care. Good night, brother.